The rancher stared at the faded county fair ticket in her hand, and for the first time, Evelyn realized the truth might have started years before the day he bought her freedom. Snow whipped across the pasture as Evelyn stood frozen in the ranch kitchen, a yellowed ticket trembling between her fingers. The fire cracked behind her. Wyatt's bandaged hand rested on the table. Neither moved, neither looked away. Outside, a loose shutter banged against the wall in the wind. Inside, one forgotten piece of paper had suddenly made every strange kindness feel connected to something she couldn't yet explain. Tell me where you're watching from before we continue this journey. The morning Evelyn Brooks was called downstairs. The first snow of the season had settled across the pasture behind the house. Not enough to cover the ground, just enough to turn everything pale. She stood at the top of the staircase for a moment, one hand resting on the worn banister. The good blue dress Agnes had ordered her to wear felt strange on her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar from the trunk where it spent most of the year. People only wore their best clothes for church or funerals, and nobody in the house had died. The front room was colder than the kitchen. A fire burned in the stove, but no one seemed interested in feeding it. Vernon Brooks sat at the pine table. Agnes stood near the window. A stranger sat across from Vernon, with his hat resting on one knee. Evelyn had never seen him before. Tall, broad shoulders, dark coat dusted with snow, a face weathered by wind and long days outdoors. He looked like every rancher who passed through town, and yet somehow different, quieter. The stranger did not stare at her when she entered. That unsettled her more than staring would have. "Evelyn," Vernon said. His voice sounded too cheerful. She hated when he used that voice. It usually meant trouble. On the table lay several folded papers. Beside them sat a small leather pouch. Money. A lot of money. Vernon pushed one of the papers toward the stranger. The stranger signed his name. Then Vernon signed his. Agnes folded her arms tighter. Nobody explained anything. Nobody asked Evelyn to sit. Nobody asked what she wanted. Finally, she looked at Vernon. "What is this?" The room grew still. The stranger lifted the leather pouch and set it beside Vernon. The soft clink of coins seemed louder than it should have been. Vernon cleared his throat. "You're leaving today." For a second, she thought she had misheard him. "Leaving? You'll be going to Cedar Run Ranch." The words landed without meaning. Then Vernon added quietly, "The debt's settled." Evelyn stared at him. The debt. The gambling debt people whispered about at the feed store. The debt collectors who had come twice that autumn. The debt Agnes pretended not to hear about. Something cold moved through her chest. "No." The word came out before she could stop it. Agnes finally turned from the window. "Don't start." Evelyn looked from Agnes to Vernon, then to the stranger. Nobody looked ashamed. Nobody looked surprised. As if this conversation had already happened without her. As if her absence had never mattered. The stranger rose from his chair. He buttoned his coat. For the first time, he met her eyes. His gaze was steady, not hard, not soft, just steady. "My name is Wyatt Callahan." She said nothing. He picked up his hat. Then he spoke the only other words he offered. "Gather your things." That was all. No speech, no explanation, no apology. An hour later, Evelyn sat beside him on a wagon heading north. A small trunk rested behind them. Everything she owned fit inside it. The road wound through frozen grasslands beneath a sky the color of old iron. Wind pushed across the open country. The wagon wheels rattled over frozen ruts. Neither of them spoke. Evelyn counted fence posts, creek crossings, miles. Anything except the fact that her entire life had just disappeared behind her. By afternoon, the Bitterroot foothills appeared in the distance. Dark pines climbed the lower slopes. Smoke rose from ranch houses scattered across the valley. Eventually, Wyatt guided the wagon through a wooden gate. A sign hung beside it. Cedar Run Ranch. The ranch spread across the valley floor beneath snow-dusted ridges. Barn, corral, main house, a creek running silver beyond the trees. Everything looked solid, permanent. Nothing looked welcoming. Wyatt unloaded her trunk himself, still without unnecessary words. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and pine wood. He led her down a short hallway, stopped beside a door, opened it. The room was small but clean. A quilt folded neatly across the bed. Wash basin, lamp, curtains, a narrow bookshelf. Then Wyatt placed a small iron key on the dresser. The lock works from both sides. Evelyn frowned. He nodded toward the door. Nobody comes in unless you want them to. For the first time all day, she didn't know what to say. Wyatt simply turned and walked away. His boots faded down the hallway. A few moments later, she heard the front door close. Silence settled over the room. Evelyn sat slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath her weight. She looked around. Then her eyes landed on something resting atop the nightstand. A book. Old. Well cared for. She picked it up. A collection of poems. Her breath caught. Years ago, she had borrowed a copy from a traveling minister. She had read it so many times she nearly knew entire passages by heart. Very few people even knew she liked poetry. Slowly, she opened the cover. Inside, near the corner of the first page, was a faded pencil mark. A date. 7 years old. Evelyn stared at it. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, wind brushed against the window. Downstairs, somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. She looked again at the date, then at the worn cover, then toward the closed door. And for the first time since leaving home, a different question appeared beside all the fear. Who was Wyatt Callahan? And why did he own a book that seemed to have been waiting for her long before she ever arrived? The questions followed Evelyn through the first weeks at Cedar Run Ranch. They were there when she woke before sunrise and saw frost feathering the edges of her window. They were there when she carried water from the pump behind the house. They were there at night when the wind moved through the pines and the old poetry book rested silently on the table beside her bed. The next morning, she found a tin cup of coffee waiting near the stove. Fresh, hot, no note, no explanation. Wyatt was already outside. She stood there, staring at the cup. Back at the Brooks house, kindness usually arrived with a price attached. A favor meant a debt. A gift meant obedience. This felt different. That unsettled her. By the time she stepped outside, Wyatt was repairing a section of fence near the south pasture. A hammer rested beside him. A leather tool belt hung low on his hip. He glanced up once. Morning. That was all. No questions. No expectations. The days settled into a rhythm. Cold mornings, wood smoke, horse feed, frozen ground crunching beneath boots. Wyatt showed her how things worked around the ranch. Only once. Then he stepped back. When she learned how to latch the chicken coop against foxes, he didn't stand over her shoulder. When she measured grain for the horses, he didn't check behind her. When she made a mistake stacking feed sacks, he quietly fixed the stack later without mentioning it. The absence of criticism felt stranger than criticism itself. One afternoon, he led an old bay mare from the corral. The horse's muzzle had gone gray with age. Its eyes were calm. This is Daisy. Evelyn looked at the mare. Wyatt handed her the lead rope. She's patient. Then he walked away. Just like that. No lesson. No warning. No speech. The mare lowered her head and breathed warm air against Evelyn's sleeve. For reasons she couldn't explain, she smiled. only for a second. The smile disappeared before anyone saw it, or so she thought. From across the yard, Wyatt had looked up from the water trough. Their eyes met briefly. Neither said anything. That evening, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains, far away. But Evelyn froze at the sound. It was an old habit she hated. As a child, she had spent nights hiding from storms beneath blankets, while rain battered thin roofs overhead. Another rumble echoed across the valley. She reached automatically for the window curtain. Before she touched it, Wyatt crossed the room. Not close, not too close, just enough. "The storm's moving east," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" He nodded toward the mountains. "The clouds are breaking over the ridge." Then he returned to his chair. No questions. No curiosity. Nothing that would force her to explain herself. Later that night, Evelyn lay awake, staring into darkness. How had he known she disliked thunder? She had never told him. A few days later, she was helping organize supplies inside the barn. She reached automatically with her left hand for a ledger book. "Careful," Wyatt said. "The binding's loose on that side." She stopped, looked at him. "You knew I'd pick it up with my left hand?" His expression barely changed. "Most people don't hammer nails with their left hand." Evelyn stared at him. The answer sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Another small stone added to a growing pile of questions. The first real snowfall arrived before Christmas. The town gathered one Saturday near the general store and feed supplier along Main Street. Wagons lined the road. Children chased one another between hitching posts. Smoke drifted from the diner across the street. Evelyn accompanied Wyatt for supplies. The conversation stopped more than once when they entered a room. People looked, then looked away. She had grown used to that. What she hadn't expected was hearing Wyatt become the subject of the whispers. "Callahan's gone soft. He paid good money for that arrangement. Man could have bought cattle instead." Wyatt ignored every word. He loaded sacks of flour into the wagon, collected receipts, checked inventory, never responded. On the edge of town, Sheriff Ben Turner approached on horseback. The sheriff removed his gloves and lowered his voice. Evelyn wasn't supposed to hear, but she did. "Ezra Pike's asking questions again." Wyatt's jaw tightened slightly. "Nothing more." "Let him ask." Ben shook his head. "He hasn't forgotten." A long silence followed. Then the sheriff added quietly, "You got there before he did. That's the only reason this ended the way it did." Evelyn froze. The wind seemed to disappear. The wagon, the horses, the town. Everything faded behind those words. "You got there before he did." That night, she sat beside her bedroom lamp with the poetry book open across her lap. Outside, snow drifted through the moonlight. Inside, the house was silent. She thought about Ezra Pike, the old gambler whose name people spoke carefully. She thought about Wyatt arriving at the Brooks house, about the money, about the papers, about the timing. For the first time, she understood something she had never considered. Wyatt had not simply appeared that morning. He had arrived before someone else, someone she did not want to imagine. The realization settled over her slowly. And somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, beneath all the questions she still carried, another feeling appeared. Small, fragile, dangerous. The possibility that Wyatt Callahan might not have been the worst thing that happened to her that day. He might have been the reason something worse never did. The thought stayed with Evelyn through the weeks that followed. Winter settled deeper over Cedar Run Ranch. Snow gathered along fence rails. The creek ran slower beneath sheets of ice. Mornings arrived late and left early. The ranch moved to the rhythm of cold weather. Feed the horses, split wood, check water troughs, keep ahead of the snow. Life should have felt simpler. Instead, Evelyn found herself watching Wyatt more closely. Not because she feared him, because she didn't understand him. One morning she came into the kitchen before dawn and found him mending a leather bridle beneath a lantern. He looked up, nodded once, then pushed a second coffee cup toward the empty place across from him. The gesture was so ordinary it felt rehearsed, not performed, practiced, as if he had been doing it for years. Evelyn sat down. The coffee steamed between them. Neither spoke. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Inside, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. That bothered her. She wasn't used to silence feeling safe. A few days later, she rode Daisy into town for supplies. The road wound through frozen fields and stands of pine dark against the snow. Main Street looked much the same as always. Wagons, boot prints, smoke rising from chimneys. The general store bell rang as she entered. Conversations paused, then resumed. People still looked, but not the way they had before. A few even nodded. Evelyn wasn't sure what to do with that. When she stepped outside carrying a sack of flour, she saw a familiar wagon approaching from the east road. Her stomach tightened instantly, even before she recognized the driver. Carolyn Brooks climbed down first. Her coat was trimmed with expensive fur. Her boots looked too new for winter roads. Behind her stepped a narrow man carrying a leather document case, a lawyer. Caroline's smile appeared before she reached the sidewalk. The same smile Evelyn had known her entire life. Pretty, polished, dangerous. Evelyn. The sound of her name felt wrong coming from Caroline's mouth. "What are you doing here?" Caroline laughed softly. "Visiting family." Neither of them believed that. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles. Snow drifted past in the wind. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Caroline glanced toward the north road leading to Cedar Run Ranch. "I'd like to discuss some paperwork." That evening, Caroline sat in Wyatt's front room. The lawyer spread documents across the pine table. Pages, signatures, legal language, the kind designed to confuse ordinary people. Caroline explained that the original transfer agreement might contain irregularities, certain filing requirements, certain county procedures, certain missing records. The lawyer nodded seriously after every sentence, as if repeating a prayer. Wyatt listened, hands folded, expression unreadable. When Caroline finished, silence filled the room. Finally, Wyatt picked up the papers, read them, then placed them back on the table. "No." The single word landed quietly. Caroline blinked. The lawyer cleared his throat. "You may not fully understand." "I understand." Wyatt's voice never rose. "She's not going back." The lawyer looked annoyed. Caroline looked worse. For the first time, her smile slipped. Only for a second. But Evelyn saw it. The visit ended shortly afterward. The lawyer gathered his documents. Caroline pulled on her gloves. Snow had begun falling again outside. As she reached the doorway, she paused, then turned toward Evelyn. The look in her eyes made Evelyn feel 10 years old again. Back in the Brooks house. Back in the place where every kindness came with a hidden cost. Carolyn smiled, slowly. "He hasn't told you why he picked you, has he?" The room went still. Even the fire seemed quieter. Evelyn stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Caroline only shrugged. "If he hasn't told you, there must be a reason." Then she left. The front door closed behind her. The sound echoed through the house. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, Wyatt returned to the papers on the table, as though nothing had happened, as though Caroline hadn't just thrown a stone into calm water. That night, Evelyn sat awake beside her lamp. The poetry book rested in her lap, unopened. Caroline's words moved through her thoughts again and again. He hasn't told you why he picked you. She remembered the book, the coffee, Daisy, the way Wyatt somehow knew she was left-handed, the way he seemed to understand things she had never explained. One memory led to another, then another, until they began fitting together in ways she didn't like. Outside, snow tapped softly against the glass. Inside, doubt settled into the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just present, the most dangerous kind. The next morning, Wyatt asked if she wanted to ride fence with him. Evelyn said no, politely, briefly. He nodded, accepted the answer, and left. No argument, no disappointment, no pressure. That should have reassured her. Instead, it made everything harder. Because if he had been cruel, she would have known what to do. Cruelty was familiar. Kindness mixed with secrets was not. Days passed. The distance between them grew quietly, like ice forming across a creek, nothing visible at first. Then suddenly, there. One evening, Evelyn stood at her bedroom window watching snow drift across the ranch. Far below, Wyatt crossed the yard carrying a lantern. The light swung gently beside him, golden against the darkness. For a moment he stopped, looked toward the house, toward her window. Neither could possibly see the other's face from that distance, yet she stepped back anyway, heart suddenly uneasy, because for the first time since arriving at Cedar Run Ranch, she wasn't wondering who Wyatt Callahan was. She was wondering what he had been hiding, and whether the answer would change everything she had started to believe about him. Winter answered before either of them could. The storm arrived during the night, not with thunder, not with warning, just wind. The kind that came screaming down from the Bitterroot Mountains and rattled every window in the house. Evelyn woke before dawn. The room was dark. Snow hissed against the glass. Somewhere outside, something heavy slammed. Then came another sound. A horse. Panicked. She was already pulling on her boots when she heard Wyatt's footsteps moving quickly through the hallway. The front door opened. Cold air rushed inside. By the time Evelyn stepped onto the porch, Wyatt was crossing the yard carrying a lantern. The flame swung wildly in the wind. "The north fence, Dwo," he called. Nothing more. He didn't ask her to come, didn't tell her to stay. He simply kept moving. For half a second she stood there watching snow race across the darkness. Then she followed. The storm had erased the world beyond a few yards. Fence posts appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The north section had collapsed under drifting snow. Several rails lay scattered across the pasture. Beyond the broken fence, horses moved nervously through the white haze. One wrong turn, one frightened run, and they could end up in the rocky ravine beyond the ridge. There was no room for distance now, no room for doubt. Only work. Wyatt drove replacement posts into frozen ground, while Evelyn carried wire and tools through knee-deep snow. Their gloves soaked through. Their breaths turned white. Neither wasted words. Hours seemed to pass that way. The storm pressing from one side, the ranch pushing back from the other. Then came the sound. A sharp cry from beyond the ridge. One of the younger horses. Wyatt looked up immediately. The animal had slipped near the edge of a narrow rocky cut, hidden beneath drifting snow. Its front legs were trapped. Panic made every movement worse. Without hesitation, Wyatt started toward it. Evelyn grabbed his sleeve. The wind nearly stole her voice. "It's too dangerous." He met her eyes, only for a moment. Then he said quietly, "So is leaving it there." And he kept going. The next several minutes felt longer than the entire morning. Snow, wind, the frightened horse, the slow work of getting it free without sending it deeper into trouble. When it was finally over, the animal scrambled upright and disappeared through the storm. Wyatt remained kneeling for a second longer than necessary. Then he stood. One hand pressed against the fence rail. Evelyn noticed the way he favored his left arm, but he said nothing. By late afternoon, they returned to the ranch house. The storm was weakening. The kitchen felt almost unreal after hours in the cold. Warm stove, dry wood, coffee brewing. Wyatt removed his gloves. Only then did Evelyn see the damage. His hand was cut and swollen from frozen wire and rough timber. "Sit down." He looked up. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." For once, she didn't look away. After a pause, he sat. She brought the small medical tin kept beside the pantry shelf. Bandages, alcohol, needles, thread, simple ranch supplies, nothing fancy. As she cleaned the wound, Wyatt remained silent. Outside, the wind slowly faded. Inside, the room seemed smaller than usual, more personal, more dangerous. Not because of what either of them said, because of what neither of them did. Neither pulled away. Neither rushed. When she opened a drawer searching for clean cloth, something slid forward. A folded paper, yellowed with age. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the date. 7 years earlier. Her fingers froze. Carefully, she unfolded it. A county fair ticket. Helena. The autumn exhibition. The back contained a single handwritten word. Evelyn. Her name. The room suddenly felt very still. Wyatt looked at the ticket, then closed his eyes briefly, as if he had known this day would come. For a long time, neither spoke. The clock above the stove ticked softly. Wood crackled inside the firebox. Finally, Evelyn looked up. "How long?" His gaze remained on the table. 7 years. The answer barely rose above a whisper. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire ranch, across every question she had carried since arriving, across the book, the coffee, the horse. Everything. Wyatt leaned back slowly. Then he told her. 7 years ago, a county fair in Helena. Crowded streets, food stalls, children running between wagons. He had stopped behind a church while waiting for a shipment of cattle supplies. A young woman sat beneath a cottonwood tree reading stories to a group of children. Most people walked past. He hadn't. He remembered her voice. Calm, patient. The way she made the children laugh. The way she spoke about books as if they mattered. He remembered one particular collection of poems she mentioned wanting to own someday. A week later, he bought a copy. Not because he expected to see her again, because somehow he couldn't forget. Life moved on. Seasons changed. Years passed. Then one day he heard Vernon Brooks intended to settle a debt, and Ezra Pike's name became part of the conversation. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "I rode through the night." Evelyn stared at him. The fire crackled softly between them. "You didn't come because of the debt." "No." The answer came immediately. His eyes finally met hers, not hiding anymore, not looking away. "No." For the first time since arriving at Cedar Run Ranch, Evelyn understood the truth. The man she had spent months trying to figure out had never been buying something. He had been trying to protect someone. And all those small mysteries she had carried since the first day suddenly pointed toward the same impossible thing. Wyatt Callahan had remembered her for 7 years, while she had never known he existed. The truth stayed with Evelyn through the last weeks of winter. Not because Wyatt repeated it. He never did. In fact, after that evening in the kitchen, he seemed determined to give her even more space than before. The next morning, he left early to inspect fencing near the western pasture. The morning after that, he spent half the day repairing a wagon axle. Nothing about his routine changed. And somehow that mattered. He wasn't asking for gratitude. He wasn't asking for affection. He wasn't asking for anything. The snow slowly began to retreat from the valley. Dark patches of earth appeared beneath the pines. The creek behind the ranch ran faster each week. Spring was coming. One afternoon, Sheriff Ben Turner arrived carrying a leather satchel and several folded documents. Evelyn was hanging laundry behind the house when she saw him ride through the gate. The look on Wyatt's face told her everything. Trouble had returned. An hour later, she learned exactly what kind. Carolyn Brooks had come back. And she had not come alone. Ezra Pike was with her. The old gambler had finally decided to appear in person. 2 days later, they arrived at Cedar Run Ranch. Carolyn stepped down from the wagon first. Her coat was newer than before. Her smile wasn't. Ezra Pike followed slowly. Gray-haired, expensive boots. The sort of man who measured people the same way he measured livestock or cards. The front room filled with tension before anyone spoke. Caroline placed fresh documents on the table. New claims. New arguments. New reasons Evelyn should be returned to the Brooks family. Ezra stood quietly beside her, watching, waiting. Certain the outcome would eventually favor him. But this time things were different. Wyatt opened Sheriff Turner's satchel. Inside were certified county records. Signed. Stamped. Recorded properly months earlier. Every paper Carolyn brought collapsed against the truth sitting in front of her. The lawyer she had hired read the documents twice, then a third time. His confidence faded with every page. Caroline saw it happening. So did everyone else. The room grew silent. Not victorious, just finished. Yet the moment that mattered most had nothing to do with paperwork. Evelyn looked around the room, at Wyatt, at Sheriff Turner, at Caroline, at Ezra Pike, at the people who had spent years deciding things for her. And something settled inside her. Not anger, not fear, something steadier. She stepped forward. For the first time, nobody spoke over her. Nobody interrupted. Nobody answered for her. I am not going back. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Caroline stared. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. The words came easier now. I understand that every choice was made without me. She looked directly at Ezra, then at Caroline. Not this one. Nobody moved. Outside, wind stirred through the cottonwoods near the creek. Inside, the room held its breath. I stay here because I choose to. Carolyn's face hardened. Ezra Pike looked away first. A few minutes later, they were gone. The sound of wagon wheels faded down the road. And for the first time since arriving at Cedar Run Ranch, Evelyn felt no urge to watch them leave. Winter ended quietly after that. The valley turned green. Wildflowers appeared along the creek. New calves arrived. The world moved forward. One evening near the end of April, Wyatt sat beside a newly repaired fence mending a saddle strap. The setting sun painted the mountains gold. He heard footsteps behind him. When he looked up, Evelyn stood there holding something. The poetry book. The same one she had found on her first night. She walked closer. Neither rushed to fill the silence. The ranch spread around them. Peaceful. Steady home. Evelyn held the book out to him. Wyatt accepted it carefully. Then she smiled. A real smile this time. Not guarded. Not uncertain. If you kept that book for 7 years, her voice softened, then I think you ought to keep the woman you bought it for, too. For once, Wyatt Callahan had no answer ready. He simply stared at her. The saddle strap slipped from his hands. Evelyn laughed softly. The sound carried across the spring grass. and suddenly he looked exactly like a man who had spent 7 years hoping for something he never expected to receive. "I was going to ask you," he admitted. "I know." "You do?" She nodded, then stepped closer. "Most of my life, somebody else made my choices." The evening breeze moved through her hair. "This one belongs to me." Wyatt stood slowly. Neither of them looked away. "Not this time. Not anymore." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small wooden church near the edge of town. Pastor Miller officiated. Sheriff Turner attended. Even some of the townspeople who once whispered came to offer congratulations. There were no grand decorations, no expensive gifts, no spectacle, just sunlight through church windows, fresh spring flowers, and 2 people standing side by side because they wanted to. When the ceremony ended, Evelyn stepped outside and looked toward the mountains beyond Cedar Run Ranch. The same mountains she had seen on the day she arrived, frightened and uncertain. They looked different now. Or perhaps she did. Because she was no longer the woman who had been traded for a debt. No longer the girl waiting for someone else to decide her future. She had become something far more valuable, someone who could choose. And standing beside her was a rancher who had remembered her for 7 years. A man who never asked to be rewarded for loving her. A man who simply waited until she was free enough to choose him back. And in the end, she did. And maybe that's the part of this story that stays with you long after the last scene fades. Because if you place yourself where Evelyn once stood, on that cold morning when other people were deciding her future, you can almost feel how heavy that kind of loneliness must have been. The feeling that your life belongs to everyone except you. The fear that kindness always comes with a price. Yet sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand speeches or dramatic promises. Sometimes it arrives quietly. A cup of coffee left on a table before sunrise. A locked door and a key placed in your hand. A person who sees your worth long before you can see it yourself. What moves me most about Evelyn and Wyatt isn't that they found love. It's that they found trust. They found a way to believe that the wounds left by other people didn't have to decide the rest of their lives. Maybe that's the lesson hidden in stories like this. The right people don't force their way into our hearts. They give us room to walk there on our own. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you were Evelyn, what moment would have finally made you trust Wyatt? And if this story stayed with you for a little while, I hope you'll join me again. There are more journeys waiting ahead. Stories of hope, mystery, second chances, and the quiet kind of courage that changes a life one day at a time. When you're ready, I'll be here for the next one.